Welcome to the Happy Black Woman Podcast, where we're on a mission to empower women to transform their lives through personal development and entrepreneurship. We bring you all the information, inspiration, and motivation you need to create a life of happiness, success, and freedom. Now, please welcome your host, the happy Black woman herself, Rosetta Thurman.
Hello and welcome back to the Happy Black Woman Podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in for another great conversation with another incredible Black woman entrepreneur. Today we have on the show Rebecca M. Thompson. She is a host of the Changing the Face of Power podcast, which you may have checked out. If not, you should. She is doing some incredible work in the world, and I'm just so excited to have her share it with you. I don't want to spoil any surprises. So Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Rosetta, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited. There's so many ways we can take this conversation, but I'm going to try to contain my excitement because, Rebecca, I always tell you all how I come up with my guests, how I end up having people on the show. And I've been having some really amazing conversations with ladies in my inner circle, our Happy Black Woman Mastermind. I get to know these ladies really well. And Rebecca is doing something that's so revolutionary and unique in the industry that I can't wait to have her share it with you for those of you who want to be leaders in your communities, leaders in your states, leaders in your towns and your counties, and all that is really some great work that she's doing. But I've just had the pleasure of getting to know Rebecca in our mastermind program. So I know a lot about her, but I want us to just take it from the top, Rebecca, and tell everybody a little bit about your mission and the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I really think about my mission as my life's work, and it really is to change the face of power. So I have been in love with politics since I was 19 years old. And when I started, I didn't see many people who looked like me. So I didn't have a last name that people knew. I didn't come from a wealthy family. And quite frankly, nobody I knew was in politics. And so when I looked around, I sort of said, well, how can somebody like me get into politics? And what I decided is I was going to move to Washington, D.C. someday, and did that. And really got an opportunity to learn about politics up close and personal. And throughout that journey in Washington and traveling the country, working on campaigns and in politics, I still didn't see women who looked like me, women who were young, women who were Black, who were from communities like mine in Detroit. So for as long as I can remember, I've had this personal passion of wanting to change the face of power by electing Black women to run for office at the state and local level. And so within the last year, I decided to just do that and to chase my dream. And now I travel the world training Black women and women to run for elected office.
That is beautiful. I love the work that you do. And I love that you're so clear on who it is that you want to help. There's always these different areas in different industries where everyone else is doing something, and then there's us. There's us. There's this unique group of Black women who need different kinds of support. And so I would love for you to share a little more about why you're so passionate about this work, how you got to where you are now, to the point where you not only have a passion for it, but you actually ended up turning it into a business where you help Black women run for office. So tell us a little bit more about the why behind this work.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I grew up on the east side of Detroit, and both of my parents actually struggled. So they both struggled with chronic unemployment. They would go years at a time without either of them having a job. My dad struggled with substance abuse. So he was an alcoholic. He was on heroin. He was on crack. And they both struggled with homelessness. So my dad was homeless on the streets of St. Louis. And here in Detroit, we were getting evicted every 6 months. And so we were constantly moving around. So I started working when I was just 14 years old. And I always say that a 14-year-old shouldn't know how much a pack of hamburger meat costs, right? I was paying bills at 14 years old. So the idea of there were people making decisions about my schools and my community and who got jobs and where the jobs were. And I realized that those were elected officials and those were policymakers. And so I said, I want to be one of those people. And that's really what sort of led me down this path. And so after spending a number of years in Washington, D.C., I was actually running a training program, training young progressive candidates to run for elected office. And every year, I would see them leave the program and go home and run for elected office. And I was encouraging all these other people to do something that I hadn't found the courage to do. And so I knew that I couldn't just encourage other people to run for elected office. I had to do it for myself. So about 5 years ago, I moved back to Detroit and realized that, I had idealized being back in Detroit and like being this change in my community, and quickly got slapped in the face with reality that, my hometown was really struggling as well. So the city was on the verge of bankruptcy. Our trash wasn't getting picked up. Street lights weren't on. And so not only was my city struggling, but my family was struggling, and they were actually worse off than when I'd left. So at that point, my mother was living in a hotel. My father was homeless. My younger brother was homeless. And so here I was, one of the few people in my family who thought about doing something about some of these issues. And so I had two choices. I could either go back to DC, where things were a whole lot more comfortable and a whole lot easier, or I could do something about these issues that were impacting my family directly. And so I decided to run for state representative to represent the neighborhood that I grew up in. And when I raised my hand, people, I heard everything. So I heard, "You're too young." So I was 30 years old at the time. They told me to wait my turn, that it was somebody else's seat. I mean, I heard everything. And the person that I decided to challenge, he was an incumbent, and he was an 8-time convicted felon. And even as a sitting state representative, he had been sued for sexual harassment for forcing a staff member to have sex to keep their job. And so I felt like, you know what? If anybody can take this guy on, it's going to be me. And so ran. And again, people said, we don't know who you are. Like, you don't have a name. Nobody knows who you are. Who do you think you are? And I hustled and I worked really hard. And over the course of a year, we outraised this incumbent legislator by 3-1. So in just the first 90 days of our campaign, I raised over $20,000. We had hundreds of grassroots donors from across the country. I knocked over 15,000 doors. We got local, state, national endorsements. And on election day, I lost by 6 votes.
Wow.
And it devastated me. It really messed me up. And in a week before election day, my father passed away. So the weekend before election day, I was burying him in St. Louis. And so that really painful, dark period, I mean, I didn't leave my couch for months. And I really questioned like what I was supposed to be doing with it. I'd learned all of this stuff. I'd literally run candidate training programs. I had been through every candidate school in the country. And it was that really dark period that I was able to discover like, this is what I was born to do. And so that's when I decided that my mission, my life's mission, was really to do a couple things. And that's to inform, inspire, and support Black women who are running for office, because that didn't exist when I was running. And so I knew that it was my job to create it.
Mm-hmm. What a beautiful story of really looking at your purpose and not only telling other people what they could do, but really walking your talk and doing it yourself and showing people what was possible. I mean, to get that close in a race where you were unknown against this person who was known is incredible. I mean, that is a powerful story and a testament to what is possible for other Black women who want to run for office. Wow. So there's so many follow-up questions I could ask as a result of that, but I know that many of the women listening have similar experiences. They've been raised and brought up in certain communities and neighborhoods, and they see things that should be changed and even want to go back and maybe do what you did. So what would be like some of the first steps they would need to take in order to do that? I mean, I know you have an amazing story and you were able to translate that into an amazing campaign. So, and you've helped so many other people. And I know you have a lot you could share with us, but if you could boil it down to like 3 things that our ladies listening could start with if they want to run for office, what would those be?
So the first thing I would say is know your why. So running for office is probably, by far, it's been the most challenging thing I've ever done. But it's also been the most amazing. And when it got really hard, when I didn't want to knock on another door or make another fundraising call, I was reminded that in addition to doing this for my parents who had really struggled and worked so hard, I was doing this for my nieces and nephews. So I've got 12 nieces and nephews. And I knew that like I really did want to leave the city better for them than what it was. And so that's what will remind me. And so I would say know why you're doing this or who you're doing it for, because there are going to be days when you'll say, you know what, forget this. It's just too hard. And seeing my nieces, in my campaign office and my nephews knocking doors with me and for me, it just reminded me every day that like I had to do this for them. I think the second thing is that many women struggle to raise money and they think, well, I don't know anybody in politics or, who am I going to ask? And the thing that I love about Black women is that we are super resourceful and we've got amazing networks and amazing communities around us. And we don't think to ask those people. And so, I had somebody say to me recently, well, how could I get your donor list? And I said, you can't. You have your own. You have to create your own. And so all your Facebook friends and all the people that you follow on Twitter and every email contact and every person in your phone, that's your donor base. And so I really love to encourage women to not think about it as these strangers who are going to give to your campaign, but it's your neighbors and it's your friends and your family. And there are a whole lot more resources there than I think people think about. And then I would say the most important is to give yourself time. So I meet a lot of women who are amazing and brilliant and they're doing great work in their community, but they want to run, in this year's election. And they give themselves 2 months and are really disappointed when they're not successful. So as I think about what I want to do next, and I think about how to help women in a real way, the biggest thing I can think about is just give yourself time to plan, to prepare, to really get yourself out there, because that takes time. And so I'd say a minimum of a year, but even 2 years if you have it. So that way you are primed and ready when it's your time.
Wow. I never would have thought that much prep time is needed. That is very powerful. So can you give an example just of what that would look like? Because I'm thinking it's different, or is it different? I don't know, depending on what type of office you're planning to run for.
Absolutely. So, if you're running for school board and maybe you need to raise $10,000, maybe that can be done in a few months. And there are so many women who will say, well, I'm just running for this small position. I don't need a lot of money. But what I would encourage them to think about is you want to have way more money than you need, because what I found myself doing is making a tough decision between buying a house or investing in my campaign, right? And when you're pouring your savings or your own money into your campaign, like at the time, it was the best bet that I could have ever made. But when I didn't win the election, I really wish that I'd given myself more time to actually raise that money. And so that's really, I think, where the time can play a big factor. But if you're running for a local race, I think part of it is you want to be head and shoulders above everybody else. And so if every other candidate is raising $5,000, you raise $20,000 because you'll be able to do a whole lot more with it. And that's when, if you have more time, you can do a little bit every day and it'll add up to that.
Yeah, I love that. Really thinking ahead and planning for it, having that vision. And also there was something you said earlier that was so interesting about donors. Like, how do you raise money? Because with every goal that we have, whether it's starting a business, raising money for a campaign or a nonprofit, and a lot of ladies listening also have like nonprofits, the money thing is one reason that people don't move forward on certain projects or certain dreams that they have. And so when you said you have a donor list already, that was really intriguing for me to hear, because a lot of people listening are like, yeah, I would love to do that. But, if only I had the money, or if only I knew people with deep pockets. And so could you speak a little more to what's the impact? Like, you raised all that money in just a short period of time. Were these small donations? Like, what was the impact of just reaching out to the people that you knew?
Yeah. So this is actually probably one of the most amazing things about the campaign. So in addition to friends and family, complete strangers actually donated to my campaign. And for a little bit of context, the incumbent that I ran against had raised about $13,000. to become state rep. So my goal was to raise $50,000. And having been an executive director at a nonprofit before, I'd worked to raise money, but it wasn't for myself. Like I'd never raised that much money for myself ever. But I will say that I had raised money for other things. And that's something that I think a lot of women take for granted. If you have raised money for, a breast cancer walk, or you've helped somebody coordinate a GoFundMe page, in a lot of ways, you already have the experience of doing this. It's just maybe not for yourself. So what I realized is that here I was, I had this experience and I just had to transfer it a little bit. So my goal was to raise $50,000. And I started thinking about, friends and family and people that I knew. But then this amazing thing started to happen where a community college student from Baltimore contributed $5. I had never met her in my life. One day I got a Facebook message from a complete stranger in Texas, and she reached out to me saying, "Hey, I'd love to chat with you. I would love to help your campaign." And after just a really brief conversation, she's like, "Great, I'm going to give you the maximum, which was $1,000. And so not only did she give me $1,000, it just so happened that she was a part of an organization called the Women's Donor Network. And she said, "Would you mind if I share your campaign with some of my friends from across the country?" And so they also gave me money. And these were complete strangers who were giving me the maximum amount because I shared their values. And I was the kind of candidate that they wanted to see in office. And so fast forward 3 years later, we are now friends, and she's going to be in Detroit in a couple of months, and we're going to get together and meet for the first time. And so it's just those kinds of things happening for me was like confirmation from the universe that like I was walking in my purpose, and people took notice and they supported me along the journey. So I would say, like, you don't have to know how you're going to raise this money. My goal was $50,000. I raised over $60,000. So it manifested. And I really believe it was because people knew that I was doing this for the right reasons, that I was working hard, and that, there had never been a woman, and still hasn't been, there's never been a woman elected to that state representative seat. So I think that really resonated for a lot of people.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you really have to connect with people in order to get those supporters from that you didn't even know. And to do that, I know you had to put yourself out there a lot. Like, what was it like telling your story and being basically on full display, for that period of time? What was that like for you?
It was like running down the street butt naked in the middle of winter. It was absolutely the most exposed that I've ever been. And I think it's actually why, I know most people won't, but I think it's why most people should have the experience of running for office, because it really does make everything you do after that so much easier. Because as women, we are afraid to put ourselves out there. And here I had known since I was 19 that I wanted to run for office. So I never was drunk driving. Like I never went to jail. I never, I didn't have anything bad because I always knew I wanted to do this. And somehow they still found things out. I mean, there was a warrant out for my arrest in Washington, D.C. I was a registered voter there, and I moved and didn't change my voter registration. And they sent me a jury summons. And because I didn't respond to it, they sent a warrant out for my arrest. My opponent found that and literally sent an email to my entire company, every news outlet in town, every political pundit, you name it, telling them that, if she doesn't show up for jury duty, how is she going to be your state representative? Now, mind you, I was running against an 8-time convicted felon. So here he was sort of dragging me in the mud. And so all that to say, I was followed. My car was broken into. It was just a really challenging period. And everything about me was on full display. My finances, my partner. And it was so challenging, but there were people who stepped up to help me along the way. And so it's why when I thought about starting a business or launching a business, there are still times when I am afraid to put myself out there. But I think running for office just prepares you in a way where I knew that, throughout the course of the campaign, my dog died, my dad died, I lost the election, and I lost my job. After that, I was like, you know what? I can survive anything.
Right.
What do you got? So
Right.
everything just became easier afterwards.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, when you talk about changing the face of power, it goes back to your original mission. And of course, it came from your own motivation and your own experiences and your own feeling that you've been called to do this. But at the same time, there are people who have the same feeling that you have, but still won't do it because of that thing that you just talked about, being exposed and people judging and criticizing and all those things. And there's a feeling that I have in that when it comes to leadership in general, politics, business, corporate, whatever, that a lot of us don't step up. Well, I mean, us, Black women, because we don't want that scrutiny. We already have enough in normal life that adding extra can be really daunting. And I do think people know that. I mean, the powers that be know that there's so
Yep.
many reasons why we won't step up. And so in your work, I know that you help women do this. Like, is there a piece, like what do you call that piece of being self-aware and being willing to put yourself out there? Is that just like plain courage that you have to have in order to change the face of power? Because there's so many pieces that could render us powerless and but there's a special piece that people have when they put themselves out there and run for office.
I think there's a couple things. One is there's like a special kind of crazy that you have to want to run for office. And I think you either have it or you don't, because this has to be something. And from my perspective, there are a lot of people who do it and don't have this. And I think you can tell, but I think this has got to keep you up at night. And it's got to be, you are reading the newspaper and you are paying attention to what's happening and you vote regularly and you are just plugged in and you see yourself as a part of the solution. So even if you don't know when you're going to run or what you're going to run for, I think there's something in us that has always been there. And so I meet a lot of women who will say, I'm thinking about it, but I don't know because of this, or I don't know because of that. And so what I would challenge them to think about is, one, it is in you already. And the question is will you lean into that or will you continue to play small? Because that actually, for me, after losing my election, every decision, I should say for about 6 months to a year, every decision that I even thought about, I questioned. And there was an opening on our city council and they were looking for people to fill this vacancy. And so many people that I respected and trusted said, hey, we really think you should submit your name. And an hour before the deadline, I decided not to do it. And I questioned myself. I questioned whether I could withstand another loss or if I didn't get selected. And I cried for weeks because I knew if I saw the names of those people who did step up and I felt like I could do a better job than them, I would be hurt. And that's exactly what happened. And that lack of making a decision actually reminded me that I am brilliant and that I do know my stuff and that I am qualified and uniquely qualified and that I just have to stop playing small. So really what that means is like, okay, how does that show up for you? And does it mean that you don't step up for opportunities? Does it mean that you are elevating other people as opposed to yourself? And so those are things I've grappled with. And so I work with the women that I train to be able to tap into that and tap into that kind of fear, because there are different kinds of fear. And what I found that I was the most afraid of is like when I was starting to lean into my power, it got scary and it got like really big. But that's actually the direction that we should all be heading in, because there's something really great on the other side of that.
Exactly. And it's like, you'll never know. If you don't try, you'll never know. And
That's right.
I think that the kind of person you're talking about is the same kind of person that I love to work with in our Happy Black Woman tribe. And that is that you're more afraid of not knowing than you are of all the obstacles that you have to overcome to fulfill your purpose. I'm always more afraid of, like, people are like, well, are you afraid of this? And then no, I'm afraid that I'll never fulfill my full potential. That's the biggest thing. And so if there's a risk, I might agonize about it, but I'm going to take it. I'm going to do it, because not doing it would be out of alignment. And when we do make decisions that are out of alignment, that's where our lives go haywire. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So awesome. I love what you shared here so far. And I just wanted to ask, because you now help other women do this. Like, you help Black women who want to run for office. You have a podcast that has had so many amazing guests that have done this successfully. How do you stay on track with this new role that you have? Like, you are empowering Black women in this arena. How do you stay focused and productive in this role of support?
So it is a good question. And it is one that I am juggling and struggling with just about every day. But I think a couple of things have been really powerful. One is being in community with other Black women who also have big dreams for their lives. Because what I've found is that starting a business is not easy. And most people will tell you that you should expect to fail, or you should expect to not make money in your first couple of years, or, all the reasons why you can't do it. And I spent actually several years dreaming up this business. And it wasn't until I actually went to your Launch Your Business live event in Atlanta that things really started to take off for me. So I was able to get accountability partners who I talk to every week, who help remind me. And actually, one of my accountability partners reminds me, she's like, you're not sleeping. So I don't care what you're working on this weekend. Like, you need to get some sleep and you need to take care of yourself. So I think surrounding myself with other like-minded women has actually been a really important part of this new chapter. The other is really managing my time. So I have started waking up earlier, and I've created a morning routine, and I map out my week. So for example, there are certain days where I literally record, 4 or 5 podcast episodes at a time. So that way there's always content in the bank. And so I'm not hustling every week to do that. So it's a balancing act. I still work full time. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit, and our work is focusing on the election. So with just a few weeks until election day, my day job has gotten really crazy. Mm-hmm. So it's actually forced me to be more thoughtful about how I manage my time and how I schedule my day. But I also just have to remind myself what I'm fighting for, and it's really my freedom. So no matter how hard it is, I remind myself, like, okay, what's your freedom worth? So are you willing to get up earlier? Are you willing to stay up later? Are you willing to work 7 days a week? And the answer is yes. So I think juggling it all it's absolutely been a challenge. And some days I'm like, what the heck am I doing? But then there are other days when I realize that literally the life that I have dreamed for myself is starting to come to fruition.
Yes.
And then it reminds me, like, oh, that's why I'm doing this. Okay,
exactly.
I get it.
Exactly. I love that. I mean, that's the journey for all of us. And I love that you shared so transparently from your journey as it is now, because a lot of ladies feel like it has to look a certain way, or it has to be perfect. You have to not have a full-time job in order to do what you're doing. But if there's something that you want to do, there is a way to achieve it, to accomplish it, to start it, to build it right now. And I love that you shared some of the things that you do to make that possible for yourself, because it's not about your circumstances. It's about, like, what you're doing is like literally making your circumstances fit your goal. You're not letting it keep you from doing what you want to do, but you're just making everything work to your vision, which is incredible.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I could talk to you all day about so many of these issues, but I do want to ask, because we've been collecting like this informal list of Happy Black Woman books from our guests on our podcast. So I was wondering if you could share before you go one of your favorite books that has helped you persevere in the face of challenges, either from, leading up to your election or since then, or just in general. Like, what's a book that you go back to that continues to inspire you?
Oh, there are so many. I would actually say one that has been really powerful is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And it's not about just making money as it is mindset, and how there are some things that if you do them every day, that you'll start to see results in other areas of your life. So that's one of my favorite. But I've also been challenging myself on this entrepreneurial journey to read a book a week. So I'm actually doing that, and I am learning so much. My library is overflowing at this point, but it's been great because I'm learning a ton. So yeah, Think and Grow Rich is at the top of that list, but so many more that I could add.
Well, I love that recommendation. And a lot of people have heard it and heard and heard it. And maybe this time will be the time that you guys go and grab it and pick it up. So I want to make sure that everybody can stay in touch with you because Rebecca, as you guys have heard, has such a wealth of wisdom, especially as it relates to helping Black women run for office and just leadership in general. I mean, the stories that she's shared here, many of us would have been mortified to go through a lot of the situation that she's gone through. But Rebecca is one of those people that she keeps on going because she's so clear about her purpose. So she's definitely somebody that you want to stay in touch with. And so tell us, what's the best way that we can do that?
The best way that they can stay in touch with me is by visiting my website at www.rebeccamthompson.com. That's rebeccamthompson.com. And in addition to that, also check out my podcast, which is called Changing the Face of Power. And there are so many stories of brilliant Black women who have run for elected office that hopefully will inspire them to do the same.
I love it. And especially as the United States is going through this very long presidential election cycle, it's like a great reminder, a beautiful reminder that there's so many other offices that we can hold that are just as important, if not more, to our communities. So thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for offering the tools and resources that you provide. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Rosetta, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Beautiful. All right, ladies. Well, there you have it. Another incredible episode. If you have not gone back and listened to our previous episodes, you're missing out. So many women have come on here pouring their wisdom and knowledge into you for free. So if you haven't checked out previous episodes, go to happyblackwomanpodcast.com and you can make sure that you stay updated on future episodes and you can check out the ones that we've done so far. Until next time, have a beautiful day, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Happy Black Woman podcast. If you want all the show's notes from today's episode, go to happyblackwomanpodcast.com. Plus, we'll send you a copy of Rosetta's free life mapping workbook. We look forward to empowering you next time. And until then, do something this week that makes you happy.